Before Ken Stabler became one of the most feared quarterbacks of the 1970s, before he won a Super Bowl, before he became known as the Snake, there was a young quarterback from Alabama who didn't look like the kind of player coaches could easily control. He was talented, confident, unpredictable, and almost impossible to intimidate. Stabler didn't play quarterback like he was following a manual. He played it like he was improvising. He could stand in the pocket and deliver a perfect throw. He could escape pressure. He could scramble when a play broke down. And when the game became chaotic, that was often when Stabler looked most comfortable. But his story is bigger than the highlights, because behind the famous nickname was a player who grew up in the South, became a star at Alabama, entered the NFL with enormous expectations, battled through injuries, and eventually became the quarterback at the center of one of the most memorable eras in Raiders history. And perhaps the strangest part? For years, people debated whether Stabler was disciplined enough to become a great quarterback. The Raiders didn't seem to care. They saw something else. They saw a quarterback who could make things happen. And when the game was on the line, that could be more valuable than perfection. Number 1. The kid from Gulf Shores. Ken Stabler was born in Foley, Alabama in 1945. He grew up in a football culture where toughness wasn't something you talked about. It was something you expected. Stabler eventually became a standout quarterback at Foley High School. And there was one thing people noticed immediately. He was a natural. Stabler wasn't simply throwing the football. He was making plays. He had the confidence to attempt throws other players wouldn't. And he had an unusual ability to remain calm when everything around him became chaotic. That quality would eventually become one of the defining characteristics of his professional career. But before the NFL, there was Alabama. Number 2. Bear Bryant. Stabler attended the University of Alabama, and that meant playing for one of the most demanding coaches in college football history, Paul "Bear" Bryant. Bryant expected discipline. He expected toughness. He expected his players to execute. And Stabler had to learn how to operate inside that system. But Stabler also brought something that couldn't easily be coached: creativity. He could see opportunities that other quarterbacks didn't. If the original play broke down, Stabler didn't necessarily panic. He improvised. He looked for another option. And sometimes that improvisation produced the biggest play of the game. That became his identity. Number 3. The quarterback who could escape. Stabler wasn't a traditional pocket quarterback. He could move. He could scramble. And he had a natural feel for pressure. When defenders came after him, he didn't always immediately throw the ball away. Sometimes he ran. Sometimes he bought time. Sometimes he waited until the absolute last second before making the throw. That style could frustrate coaches, but it could also destroy defenses. Because defenders couldn't always predict what Stabler would do next, and that uncertainty became one of his greatest weapons. Number 4. The left hand. There was another thing that made Stabler immediately recognizable. He was left-handed. That might sound like a small detail. It wasn't. The ball came out differently. His throwing motion looked different. The angles were different. And receivers had to get accustomed to catching passes from a left-handed quarterback. But once Stabler settled into his rhythm, the left arm became a weapon. He could throw with touch. He could throw deep. And most importantly, he could make difficult throws while moving. That ability would eventually make him one of the most dangerous quarterbacks in the NFL. Number 5. The Raiders take a chance. The Oakland Raiders selected Stabler in the second round of the 1968 AFL Draft. But his path to becoming the starter wasn't immediate. He spent time developing. He learned the professional game, and he had to wait for his opportunity. The Raiders already had established quarterbacks, so Stabler had to prove that he was ready, and slowly, he did. Oakland had something special developing. The Raiders were becoming one of the most aggressive and physical teams in professional football, and Stabler fit them perfectly. Number 6. The Raiders were different. The Oakland Raiders had an attitude. They were physical, confident, sometimes intimidating, and they weren't afraid of anyone. That personality became part of the franchise, and Stabler eventually became the perfect quarterback for it. He wasn't conservative. He wasn't afraid of risk. He wasn't interested in simply surviving. He wanted to attack. And the Raiders had receivers who could make that philosophy work. Cliff Branch could stretch a defense. Fred Biletnikoff could create separation, and Stabler had the arm to find them. Suddenly, Oakland had an offense capable of scoring from almost anywhere. Number 7. The Snake. Then came the nickname, the Snake. It wasn't simply a marketing gimmick. It fit Stabler. He was elusive, unpredictable, and difficult to bring down. Defenders could think they had him, only to watch him slip away. He didn't always run with overwhelming speed. He simply understood how to move. A step here, a cut there, a quick escape. Then suddenly, he was looking downfield again, and the receiver was open. That ability became one of the reasons Raiders fans loved him. He wasn't always conventional. He didn't have to be. Number 8. The Raiders' rise. By the early 1970s, Oakland was becoming a major force in the AFC. The Raiders were physical, their defense was aggressive, their offense was explosive, and Stabler was developing into a legitimate star. But there was still one question: could he win the biggest games? Because regular season success wasn't enough. Oakland needed to reach the Super Bowl, and eventually they got their chance. Number 9. The 1976 Raiders. The 1976 Raiders were loaded. They finished the regular season 13-1, and Stabler was at the center of the offense. He had become one of the most dangerous quarterbacks in football. But the postseason was where the real test would come. Oakland had to defeat Pittsburgh, and that wasn't easy. The Steelers were the defending champions. They were physical, they were disciplined, and they had one of the greatest defenses in NFL history. But Stabler and the Raiders were ready. Number 10. The playoff battle. The Raiders defeated Pittsburgh in the AFC Championship game, and suddenly, Oakland was going to the Super Bowl. For Stabler, this was the moment he had been waiting for. All those years of development, all the criticism, all the questions, all the uncertainty. Now there was one game standing between him and a championship, and waiting on the other side was the Minnesota Vikings. Number 11. Super Bowl XI was played in Pasadena, California. Oakland faced Minnesota, and the Raiders dominated. Oakland won 32-14. Stabler completed 12 of 19 passes for 180 yards and a touchdown. He wasn't required to throw for 400 yards. He didn't need to. The Raiders controlled the game. Their defense dominated. Their running game worked, and Stabler made the throws when Oakland needed them. After years of waiting, Ken Stabler was a Super Bowl champion. Number 12. The moment the Snake struck the Super Bowl victory confirmed something. Stabler wasn't simply a colorful quarterback. He was a winner, and he had become the leader of one of the most intimidating teams in football. The Raiders had personality, they had swagger, they had toughness, and their quarterback had the same qualities. But perhaps the most important thing was his ability to remain calm under pressure. Stabler could look completely relaxed in situations where other quarterbacks became desperate. That was the Snake. He didn't need to panic. He waited, he watched, and then he struck. Number 13. The lefty who threw like a right-hander. One of Stabler's greatest strengths was his ability to throw accurately while moving. He wasn't always standing perfectly in the pocket. Sometimes his feet weren't set. Sometimes the protection broke down. Sometimes he was moving sideways. And somehow, the football still arrived where it needed to go. That's what separated him from many quarterbacks. The play didn't have to remain perfect. If the original design broke down, Stabler could create another play. That made him incredibly dangerous. Number 14. The 1974 playoff game that almost became legendary. Before Oakland won Super Bowl XI, there was another postseason game that became part of Stabler's mythology. The 1974 playoff game against Miami. The Dolphins were one of the great teams of the era. They had won multiple championships, and Oakland was trying to knock them out. Late in the game, the Raiders were trailing. Then came one of the most famous plays in franchise history. Stabler scrambled, he escaped pressure, he looked downfield, and he threw a desperation pass toward the end zone. Clarence Davis was there. Touchdown. Oakland won. The play became known as the Sea of Hands, and it was a perfect representation of Stabler. The play had broken down. He didn't panic, he improvised, and somehow, the Raiders won. Number 15. The quarterback who loved chaos. This is what made Stabler so dangerous. Some quarterbacks needed everything to go according to plan. Stabler didn't. If the protection broke down, he could improvise. If the receiver wasn't open, he could wait. If the pocket collapsed, he could escape. And if the game came down to one final possession, he wanted the football. That attitude became a defining characteristic of the Raiders. They didn't want easy games. They wanted pressure, they wanted confrontation, and they had a quarterback who could survive in that environment. Number 16. The darker side of the snake. But Stabler's personality wasn't always celebrated. He was known for his nightlife, he was known for being unconventional, and there were questions about his lifestyle. Some coaches worried about his discipline. Some people wondered whether he took football seriously enough. But there was a contradiction, because when Stabler stepped onto the field, he could become intensely focused. The same man who seemed relaxed away from football could become completely different when the game started. That contrast made him fascinating. He wasn't the stereotypical quarterback. He didn't live like one. He didn't always behave like one. But he could play like one. Number 17. The Raiders needed the snake. Oakland had a personality that demanded a quarterback who could handle pressure. Stabler became that quarterback. He wasn't simply throwing passes. He represented the Raiders' identity. Aggressive, fearless, unpredictable, and willing to take chances. When the Raiders were behind, Stabler didn't seem defeated. He looked for the opening, and if there wasn't an opening, he tried to create one. That mentality helped Oakland become one of the defining teams of the 1970s. The turning point Ken Stabler's story had now reached its peak. The kid from Alabama became Bear Bryant's quarterback. The college player became an AFL draft pick. The backup became Oakland's starter. The unconventional quarterback became the snake, and the player people questioned became a Super Bowl champion. But winning the Super Bowl wasn't the end, because the next chapter would reveal the cost of Stabler's style. The injuries, the criticism, the decline. The quarterback who could escape almost anything would eventually discover that there was one thing even the snake couldn't outrun. Number 18. The snake was never a perfect quarterback. Stabler was never the quarterback who made every coach comfortable. He could be brilliant, then reckless. He could make a perfect throw, then attempt something that made absolutely no sense. But that unpredictability was part of his appeal. You couldn't completely control Ken Stabler, and sometimes that was exactly what made him dangerous. When a quarterback doesn't follow the expected script, defenders can't always anticipate what is coming. Stabler could turn a broken play into a big play. He could turn a bad situation into a first down, and sometimes he could turn what looked like a lost game into a comeback. Number 19. The comeback against Baltimore. One of the most famous examples came against the Baltimore Colts in the 1977 playoffs. The Raiders were behind. The Colts had the lead, and time was running out. Oakland needed something extraordinary. Stabler delivered. The Raiders mounted a dramatic comeback and eventually won in overtime. The game became another part of the legend surrounding Stabler, because this was what he did. When everything looked lost, he kept playing. When the pressure increased, he became more dangerous. And when the Raiders needed one final drive, the ball went into the hands of the snake. Number 20. The Raiders and the art of the comeback. This became one of the defining themes of Stabler's career. He wasn't simply a quarterback who won when everything went according to plan. He was a quarterback who could survive when everything went wrong. That distinction matters. Football is rarely perfect. Protection breaks down. Receivers miss assignments. Defenses make adjustments. The clock disappears, and suddenly, a quarterback has to create something. Stabler was comfortable in that environment. He could improvise, he could move, he could throw under pressure, and he could make decisions quickly. That made him a nightmare for defenses. Number 21. The arm that made the Raiders dangerous. Stabler had a strong enough arm to attack deep, and the Raiders had the receivers to take advantage. Cliff Branch could run past defenders. Fred Biletnikoff could find space, and Stabler could put the football where only his receiver could catch it. That combination was devastating. A defense could stop the short game, and suddenly Branch was behind them. A defense could focus on the deep ball, and Biletnikoff would find the opening underneath. Stabler didn't need to throw 40 passes to control a game. He needed the right opportunity. And when that opportunity appeared, he attacked. Number 22. The cost of playing like the snake. But there was another side to that style. Stabler took hits. He held the ball. He waited for receivers to get open. He sometimes stayed in the pocket longer than he should have. And he paid for it. Quarterbacks in that era didn't receive the same protection they receive today. Defenders could hit quarterbacks hard. There were fewer rules designed specifically to protect them. So every time Stabler extended a play, there was a physical price. The snake could escape pressure, but he couldn't escape every hit. Number 23. The Raiders after the Super Bowl. The Raiders remained competitive after winning Super Bowl 11, but maintaining championship-level football is difficult. Players age, coaches change, rosters change, opponents learn, and the AFC became increasingly competitive. Stabler was still dangerous, but the Raiders weren't quite the same team. The pressure to remain dominant continued, and Stabler's career began entering a different phase. The young quarterback who had once been able to improvise his way out of almost anything was getting older, and the physical toll was becoming more obvious. Number 24. The image of the outlaw. By this point, Stabler had become more than a quarterback. He represented the Oakland Raiders. The Raiders had become associated with a certain type of player: tough, aggressive, unpredictable. And Stabler fit the image perfectly. The nickname Snake became famous, the personality became famous, the lifestyle became famous, and his performances made the image believable. He wasn't pretending to be dangerous. He actually played that way. That authenticity mattered. Raiders fans didn't just watch Stabler. They identified with him. Number 25. The player who didn't fit the mold. Football has always had traditional expectations. Quarterbacks are supposed to be disciplined. They are supposed to be leaders. They are supposed to be controlled. They are supposed to avoid unnecessary risks. Stabler broke some of those expectations. He was unconventional. He was outspoken. He had a reputation for enjoying life, and he wasn't interested in pretending to be someone he wasn't. Yet his teammates trusted him. That's the contradiction. The same personality that could frustrate coaches could inspire teammates. Because when Stabler walked onto the field, he believed he could win, and his teammates believed it too. Number 26. The 1970s Raiders were built for him. Oakland had a collection of personalities. John Madden on the sideline. A defense filled with intimidating players. Receivers who could make explosive plays. And Stabler at quarterback. It was the perfect environment for him. Madden understood how to use Stabler's strengths. He didn't need the quarterback to become someone else. He needed him to become the best version of himself. Let Stabler read the field. Let him improvise. Let him attack, and trust him to make the big decision. That relationship became one of the most important parts of Stabler's development. Number 27. The relationship with John Madden. John Madden was demanding, but he also understood players, and he understood what made Stabler special. Stabler wasn't going to be the most conventional quarterback, so instead of trying to completely change him, Madden learned how to use him. That mattered, because great coaches don't always force players into a system. Sometimes, they build the system around what the player does best. Madden knew Stabler could create. He knew Stabler could throw, and he knew Stabler wasn't afraid of pressure. So Oakland gave him freedom, and that freedom helped create some of the most memorable moments of the Raiders' golden era. Number 28. The 1977 season, after the Super Bowl victory, expectations were enormous. But the Raiders couldn't simply repeat history. The following seasons brought injuries, roster changes, and increasingly difficult competition. Stabler continued to produce, but the league was changing. Defenses were becoming more sophisticated. The Raiders' dominance wasn't guaranteed anymore. And Stabler was beginning to realize something every great player eventually has to confront. You can't stay at your peak forever. Number 29. The trade. In 1980, the Raiders traded Stabler to the Houston Oilers. For Raiders fans, it was the end of an era. The quarterback who had become synonymous with Oakland was gone, but Stabler wasn't finished. He joined Houston, and suddenly, the Snake was wearing a different uniform. It was strange. The player who had become the symbol of Oakland's rebellious identity was now trying to build another chapter somewhere else. Number 30. Houston. Stabler's time in Houston was different. He was older. His body had taken years of punishment, and the expectations weren't the same. He still had experience. He still understood defenses. He still had the ability to make plays, but the explosive version of Stabler wasn't always there anymore. The player who had once escaped pressure with ease was becoming more dependent on timing and experience. The transformation was subtle. The Snake was still dangerous, but he wasn't the same Snake. Number 31. The New Orleans chapter. Stabler later played for the New Orleans Saints. By then, his career was nearing its end. The superstar quarterback from Oakland had become a veteran trying to help another team, and that is one of the least remembered parts of his story. People remember the Raiders. They remember the Super Bowl. They remember the Snake. But they often forget how long Stabler's career continued after Oakland. He kept playing, he kept competing, and eventually, he knew it was time to stop. Number 32. Retirement. Stabler retired after the 1984 season. His career was over, but the debate about his greatness continued. Because Stabler's statistics weren't always enough to explain what he meant to the Raiders. He wasn't simply a statistical machine. He was a player who changed the personality of a franchise. He became part of the identity, and his greatest performances came in moments that fans never forgot. That's why his legacy was bigger than the numbers. Number 33. The numbers. Stabler finished his NFL career with 27,938 passing yards and 194 touchdown passes. He also earned multiple Pro Bowl selections and was named NFL MVP in 1974. But numbers alone don't capture the snake. His most important statistics are attached to moments. The Super Bowl, the sea of hands, the comeback against Baltimore, the AFC battles, the deep throws, the fourth-quarter drives. Those are the things people remember, because great players aren't always remembered by totals. Sometimes they're remembered by what they did when the game became impossible. Number 34. The most famous left-handed quarterback of his era. Stabler was unusual in almost every way. Left-handed, unconventional, risk-taking, confident, and completely comfortable with chaos. That made him different, but it also made him memorable. You could recognize a Stabler game. The pocket would collapse, he'd move. The defense would think the play was finished. Then suddenly, the football would be flying downfield. That was the snake. Number 35. The Hall of Fame debate. For years, there was debate over whether Stabler belonged in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Some argued that his statistics weren't strong enough. Others pointed to his impact, the Super Bowl, the MVP, the postseason performances, the Raiders' success, the influence he had on the franchise. Eventually, Stabler received the honor. He was elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2016, after his death. And that recognition finally gave his career the official acknowledgement many Raiders fans had believed he deserved for years. Number 36. The tragedy of his final years. Stabler died in 2015 at the age of 69. After his death, researchers found evidence of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, in his brain. The discovery brought a darker dimension to his football legacy, because the hits that helped create the legend had also potentially contributed to long-term damage. That's one of the hardest truths about football history. The same collisions fans celebrated could have consequences years later. Stabler's story became part of the larger conversation about player safety and the long-term effects of repeated head trauma. And suddenly, the story of the snake wasn't only about touchdowns, it was also about the price players paid to entertain millions of people. Number 37. Why Raiders fans never forgot him. Ask Raiders fans about Ken Stabler, and you won't simply hear statistics, you'll hear stories. You'll hear about his confidence, his attitude, his toughness, his ability to make something out of nothing. You'll hear about the Super Bowl. You'll hear about the sea of hands. You'll hear about the comeback wins. And you'll hear about the way he represented the Raiders. Stabler wasn't perfect. He didn't need to be. The Raiders didn't want perfect. They wanted dangerous. And nobody represented that better than the snake. Number 38. What made him different? So what actually separated Stabler from other quarterbacks? It wasn't simply the left arm. It wasn't simply the mobility. It wasn't simply the confidence. It was the combination. He could read defenses. He could throw deep. He could escape. He could improvise. And he could remain calm when the situation became chaotic. That last quality might have been the most important. Because football eventually reaches a moment when the plan doesn't matter anymore. The pocket collapses. The defense knows what's coming. The clock is running. And the quarterback has to create something. Stabler was built for that moment. Number 39. The real story of the snake. The easiest way to describe Ken Stabler is as a rebellious quarterback. But that doesn't tell the entire story. The real story is about adaptability. He wasn't the biggest. He wasn't the fastest. He wasn't the most disciplined. But he understood how to survive. He learned from Bear Bryant. He developed under John Madden. He learned how to attack defenses. He learned how to manage pressure. And he turned those lessons into his own style. That's why he became successful. He didn't try to become someone else. He became Ken Stabler. The final question. So what are the Ken Stabler stories that sound unbelievable? That a quarterback from Alabama became one of the most recognizable players of the 1970s? True. That he played for Bear Bryant? True. That he became the left-handed leader of the Oakland Raiders? True. That he won Super Bowl XI? True. That he helped produce one of the most famous plays in Raiders history? True. That he became NFL MVP? True. That he was traded away from Oakland and continued playing for other teams? True. That after his death, his brain was found to have evidence of CTE? True. But perhaps the most unbelievable part of Ken Stabler's story is how perfectly he fit the team that drafted him. The Raiders didn't need a quarterback who looked ordinary. They needed someone unpredictable, someone fearless, someone who could survive chaos, someone who could look at a broken play and think, maybe this isn't broken yet. That's what Stabler did. He turned chaos into opportunity. He turned pressure into confidence. And he turned the Oakland Raiders into his personal stage. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't conventional. He wasn't always easy to understand. But when the game was on the line, you wanted the snake holding the football. Because he had a rare ability to make impossible situations feel manageable. The kid from Alabama became Bear Bryant's quarterback. The second-round pick became the face of Oakland. The unconventional left-hander became an NFL MVP. The quarterback who loved chaos became a Super Bowl champion. And the player known as the Snake became one of the most unforgettable characters in NFL history. Ken Stabler didn't play football by the rules everyone else followed. He played it his way. And sometimes, that's exactly why it worked. The defense could know what was coming. They still couldn't always stop it. Because when the pocket collapsed, when the clock was running, when the season was on the line, and when everybody else started thinking the play was over, Ken Stabler was just getting started. That's why they called him the Snake.